Welcome, everyone. We're going to be presenting Crypto Jews today with our guest speaker, Art Benveniste. He grew up in a community of Ladino-speaking Jews from Rhodes and was a member of their synagogue, Sephardic Hebrew Center. For many years, he has been interested in tracing the roots of Sephardic culture. And some time ago, he became aware of families in Spain, Portugal, Mexico, Brazil, and who practiced Jewish rites secretly. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Jews of Spain and Portugal were forced to convert to become Catholic. And he has been active in the Society of Cryptic Judaic Studies since 1993, where he was president of the society, and he was co-editor of Ha Lapid, the publication. And since then, he has attended various conferences around the world, meeting with leaders of the crypto Jews organizations. And where for 500 years, they attended Catholic Church, but secretly they preserved the Jewish customs and rituals at home. Please help me welcome Art Benveniste.
Hello, and thank you. Let's start with a little story that I learned from the late Professor Moshe Lazar. He taught both at SC and UCLA. He said some time ago there was an American antique collector. He was in Europe. He saw a big bowl, big silver bowl, decorated with birds with their wings extended. He bought it, brought it home. It was old and dented. He sent it in to be repaired. While they were working on it, they noticed that one of the wings of one of the birds was loose. So they noticed it was on a hinge. It opened up. Inside was a little container. Didn't know what it was. So he explored it. It was one of these things you use on Shabbat for the the little flame. Obviously, this had been owned by a secret Jew who was hiding it. Now, let's start off with some terms. Crypto Jew, somebody who is secretly Jewish, openly Christian, but secretly Jewish. A converso is someone who converted to generally Christianity, sometimes Islam in some of those countries. And the conversion could have been willingly or forced. The word marrano it's actually means swine in Spanish, and it's an insult. And in the early days, when some Jews in Spain converted, before other Jews were forced to convert, the Jews themselves called the converts marrano, or swine. Now, as we'll see later in my presentation, this word marrano is an insult in Spanish, but not in Portuguese. The Portuguese secret Jews actually called themselves marranos. On the island of Majorca, they have their own odd language, and they use the word shweta, meaning the same as marrano. Anusim, that's a Hebrew word, a person who is forced. That's the word we usually use today, somebody who has been forced to convert. Meshumad is an apostate in Hebrew. Those who remain Jewish would insult those who converted by calling Meshumad. New Christian, that's obvious, converso. The word Sephardic, the Sephardi is the old Hebrew word referring to Spain. Okay, here is Rabbi Baruch Garson. He's retired now. He was the chief rabbi of Spain. He also used to tutor Queen Sophia on Jewish matters. He told a few stories. I was with him. We had in 1992, the 500th anniversary of when the Jews were expelled. The king invited Jews to return to Spain. And I was part of the group that went. We were led by Rabbi Garson. We went from town to town, and met the mayors and had receptions and such. But there's a few stories that Rabbi Garçon told. He said, uh, he got a call late one night. He got a phone call. Someone said, "I'm a priest and we have a major problem. And could you please come over here immediately and help us?" So he went to the house. It was past midnight. "What's the problem?" The priest said, "My father's dying. Can you go inside and say a prayer?" He says, "But you're the priest. Why don't you say the prayer?" The priest said, "My father won't let me. He told me to call a rabbi." So a priest whose family was secretly Jewish. Well, here is a book called The Mezuzah in the Madonna's Foot, written by the late Trudy Alexi. She lived here in Tarzana in the Los Angeles area. She died a few years ago. She's one of these odd things, an Ashkenazi Jew who was a secret Jew. She was from Czechoslovakia. When the Nazis were moving towards Czechoslovakia, her family quickly converted to Protestantism, then somehow made their way to France. When the Nazis were marching towards France, they converted to Catholicism. The reason they did it this way was so that the documents, when the document said, "What were you before you were a Catholic?" it said you were a Protestant. Went down into Spain, lived as a Catholic in Spain, but knowing that she was Jewish. When she grew up, she came to the US and got very interested in secret Jews. She found a priest in the western part of the United States. She promised the priest that she would never divulge his name. But part of his story was that his family had a statue of the Madonna near their door. As they went in and out of the door, they would kiss the foot of the Madonna. Hidden in the foot of the Madonna was a mezuzah. Well, that was an interesting story, but something happened with that story. Here's a photo I took in Brazil. The fellow on the left, Gilvanci de Oliveira del Portillo. We'll tell his story now. The guy on the right, I'll tell his story later in my presentation. Gilvanci, I found him online. There was a website where Sephardic Jews communicated, asked questions, and answered. His name popped up. He mentioned that he was from Brazil and he just discovered that his family was Jewish. So I contacted him. He sent me some stories about things that his family did. Then he sent me an email. The title was The Mezuzah in the Madonna's Feet. You know, the book we just saw, Mezuzah in the Madonna's Foot. So I thought he was going to ask me about that book. And because his English was poor, he just got the last word wrong. He didn't ask me about the book. He was describing his family in Brazil. Before the family told him that he was Jewish, his grandmother had a Madonna next to the door, kissed the foot as she went in and out. One day, he saw her take a little box, as he described it, out of the foot of the Madonna, and he noticed that box looked almost the same as a little box that when the family returned to Judaism, they invited a rabbi to help them, and the rabbi showed them how to put a mezuzah on the door. And this box looked like the little box that they put on the door. The same story down in Brazil and up here in the Western United States. And now another story, also coming from Rabbi Garçon. He lives in Madrid. They wanted to buy some land up a little north of Madrid, halfway to Barcelona, to build a camp for Jewish children in Spain. He found a piece of land for sale. He contacted the owner, who lived in Barcelona. It was late in September. They talked about, okay, let's meet. How about next week or so? Okay. So they hung up. Then the guy from Barcelona called back, said, "I'm sorry, there's a few days next week when I'm not able to meet." Okay, what days are those? He gave him the days. The rabbi wrote them down. They hung up. The rabbi went to put them on the calendar, and what were they? Late September, next week, what is it? The high holidays. The days when this guy couldn't meet were the high holidays. Called him back. Why can't you meet on those days? He said, well, my family has a funny calendar, and there's certain days when we can't do business and such every year. And by the way, this is the only case of a secret Jew who kept the Hebrew calendar. All the others did their things like 1 week before Easter or 1 week before Christmas and such. Anyway, and he said, we have certain days when we can't do things. We take it easy. So the rabbi says, well, just out of curiosity, what are your dates next year and the following year? And they were the high holidays all the way through. The rabbi says, what did you do on those days? And he said, we played cards. Then the rabbi explained that secret Jews in Spain used to sit around a table with cards on the table and their prayer books on their laps. If somebody walked by the window, they would look like they're playing cards, or if the servant came into the room, they'd play cards. And when they were alone, they'd go back to their prayer books. Okay, I was speaking in Tucson, Arizona, and I told this story. Somebody in the audience was working for the local Tucson Jewish newspaper, printed it in the paper. Somehow a copy of the paper got to New Mexico. This woman, Emma Loya in New Mexico, read it, sent a letter to the paper. They forwarded it to me. Let's go down to the second paragraph of the letter. Our Academica Hebraica in Albuquerque had researched and recorded the following information that may or may not relate. By the way, she misspelled my name to the statement that I'd made. The word baraha, the crypto Jews in New Mexico call cards barajas. The word baraha alludes to the word beraha, or prayer in Hebrew. Our Sephardic grandparents cleverly hid their home prayers away from the Catholic Church and its members. Well, I published this on the website of our Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, and I got a whole lot of replies. I got about 5 people mentioning how their family played cards and hid them. So let's move on to a little bit of the history. Here's the map of Sepharad, Spain and Portugal. Here's a little bit of the history. You notice the first persecution of the Jews was in the year 589 by King Recaredo. King Recaredo was the first king of Spain to become a Catholic. Shortly after he became a Catholic, he began persecuting Jews. Skip down to the year 1391. I want to focus on that. Pogroms in Seville. Also down in the year 1492, we all know about Columbus, but a few other things happened in that same year. That's the same year that the Muslims surrendered down in the southern part of Spain, and the entire peninsula became Catholic. That's also the year that Castile and Aragon, they were 2 separate kingdoms. Isabella was the Queen of Castile, Ferdinand was the King of Aragon, but they ruled 2 separate countries. In 1492, they merged the 2 countries and the nation of Spain was created. That's also the year that the Jews were expelled. And of course, you know about Columbus. So here's a whole list of attacks on Jews over all these different years. And as I said, let's look at 1391, especially in the city of Toledo. Here is a drawing of a building that is now called the Church of Santa Maria la Blanca. The direct translation is Saint Mary the White, but really it means Saint Mary the Pure. This was a synagogue. In 1391, the Jews were holding a service in the synagogue. A priest, a fanatic priest named Vicente Ferrer, stormed the synagogue with his henchmen, forcibly converted the Jews, took over the building, and converted it to a church. And this was the beginning of the persecution of the Jews of Spain, the big time persecution. Here I am in that church. I took this photo of my two grandchildren and their mother. I wanted to show them the spot where all of this happened. This was 1391. When we were there with the rabbi in 1992, we asked if we could have a Jewish service in this building. The authorities said, well, the building opens at 10 o'clock to the public, but we'll let you have it from 8 to 10, but you're not allowed to have a religious service. You can have a lecture. Well, okay. The night before, the next day was Tisha B'Av. That evening, the night before Tisha B'Av, the rabbi came to us. We were all in the same hotel. He gathered us together and says, guess what? I called some of the authorities, and we said we can have a Tisha B'Av service in that building. So the next day, I was part of the first Jewish service held in this building in 601 years. Now, let's go back a bit. I said the priest who invaded that building was named Vicente Ferrer. After he died, he was made a saint, Saint Vincent, or San Vicente. In Los Angeles, we have a street called San Vicente Boulevard. The street, by coincidence, goes through the Jewish quarter. In fact, right where San Vicente Boulevard crosses Wilshire, that's half a block from the Jewish Federation building. So right through the to the Jewish quarter in LA, we have a street named after the priest who became a saint because he converted over 20,000 Jews. I looked him up online at a Catholic website about saints. First time I looked him up was about 20 or 30 years ago, and he became a saint because he was able to convert 20,000 Jews. I looked him up again more recently, and they added a little sentence. Some say he was a little excessive in his methods. Anyway, I'm thinking it's time to change the name of that street. Let's go back to the history of Spain. 1482, the Inquisition was started just about that time. They got permission to form the Inquisition in 1479. Took them about a year or two to get it going. And there was a separate Inquisition in Castile and in Aragon. Well, the Grand Inquisitor of Aragon was murdered. The guy who was convicted of the crime was named Sant'Angelo. What's interesting about that? He was either the uncle or the cousin of Luis de Sant'Angelo. Luis de Sant'Angelo is the man that introduced Columbus to Isabella and Ferdinand. And then when they approved his trip to sail to India, he's the one who arranged the finances for the trip. Okay, 1491. That's, if you notice, it's 1 year before 1492. There is a case of the Santo Niño de la Guardia, the Holy Child of La Guardia. There was a Jew, a converted Jew named Garcia. He was a traveling salesman. I forgot what it was that he was selling. I used to know. He goes from town to town selling his goods. He goes to the town of La Guardia, checks into an inn. In the evening, he goes down to dinner. And in those days, an inn, everybody who stayed at the inn ate together. There was a big table that put out food. So he's down there eating. He left his big pack up in his room. Somebody got in there in order to steal some of his merchandise from his pack. When they open the pack, they find some of these wafers that are used by Catholics in a communion. What is this guy doing with communion wafers? The thief takes the wafers, shows them to his local priest. The priest reports them to the Inquisition. This guy Garcia is arrested, tortured. Under torture, he says, he confesses that he took the wafers because he and his friends were going to have a secret service that would cause the Catholics to disappear from Spain. What are the names of his friends? Interestingly, their last name was Franco, just like Francisco Franco, the dictator of Spain later on. So these the Francos are arrested. What were you going to do? Well, we were going to sacrifice a child, and we sacrificed the child. And what did you do with the body? We buried the body in such and such a place. They described where they buried it. So the officials went there to that space. No body of a child is there. Aha! It's a miracle. The body was taken up to heaven immediately. It's a miracle, therefore that child is a saint. So this sainted child then becomes a martyr. There's a statue of him in the town of LaGuardia. There's a huge pageant that takes place every year. Recently, authorities have gone through the old record. The Spanish did a good job of keeping legal records. They went through the old records in LaGuardia. There's no evidence of anybody reporting a missing child. So the whole thing was mythology. But this is interesting. This is a photo of a fresco inside the big cathedral of Toledo. LaGuardia is pretty close to Toledo. Part of this is damaged, so you don't see all of it. This little door in the cathedral, if you've been to Spain, every cathedral has a big fancy door in the front, beautiful. The nobility would enter through that door. The peasants would enter through a little door on the side. This is the door where the peasants entered, and when they left, they saw this mural. Look on the lower left. You see these evil Jews kidnapping the poor little boy. And then up on top, he's murdered, and then finally on the other side, he goes to heaven. The last thing the peasants see as they leave the building is the Santo Niño de la Guardia. Here's and that was 1491. The next year, we get the expulsion of the Jews. Here is a painting of the signing of the decree to expel the Jews. And here is the decree itself with the signatures of Ferdinand and Isabella at the bottom. Okay, there is a story. It has not been actually proven to be true. The two wealthiest Spaniards were Abraham Señor and Isaac Abravanel. By the way, one of the books I checked on Abraham Señor, they called him Abraham Señor Benveniste, which is my name. Obviously, his mother was named Benveniste. It is said that when after Ferdinand and Isabella decreed that the Jews must convert or leave the country, these two approached Ferdinand and Isabella, offered a huge bribe if they would drop the expulsion decree. The chief inquisitor came into the room, threw a bunch of coins on the floor, and said, "Our Lord was sold out for 30 pieces of silver. Will you sell him out again?" So Ferdinand and Isabella went through with the expulsion of the Jews. Okay, let's look at Portugal. Where did the Jews go when they were expelled, and how many Jews were they? One, we don't know how many Jews. The estimates vary greatly, but it could have been up 100,000, 150,000. Probably the biggest number went to Portugal. Portugal, for that moment in history, was sort of open to the Jews. We'll come back to that in a minute. A lot went to Morocco. My family and a whole lot went over to the Ottoman Empire. Now, the king of Portugal let the Jews in if they paid a fee. If you were poor, you could pay 8 maravedis. That was their coin, the maravedi, and you had 1 year a permit to stay in Spain for 1 year. Then you had to leave. If you were wealthy, you paid 100 maravedis and you could stay for life. Of course, most of them were the poor ones, and they paid 8. Well, A year later, it's time for these poor ones to leave, but the king is about to go to war with Morocco, and he's afraid these Jews, if they leave, they'll go to Morocco. And they were pretty skilled in things like navigation and weaponry and such. And he didn't want this knowledge to get to the Moroccans. So he saw to it that that there was no ships in the harbor to take the Jews. He then said the Jews didn't leave when they were supposed to, therefore they are slaves of the king. Now, this is just the poor Jews. The rich Jews were still free. Okay, a year later, the king dies. Now, the king had a son. The son was married to the eldest daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. The idea probably was that they would have a son who later would be the king of both Portugal and Spain. But the son's king died in a drowning accident. Some people thought it wasn't an accident. Anyway, there was no heir to the throne when the king died. The various cousins of the king fought to see who would take over. And King Manuel, one of the cousins, won out. He became the king of Portugal. He realized that these Jews were forcibly converted. That was against their will, and they weren't guilty of anything. So he kind of eased up on them. But a lot of people didn't accept him as the king. One of his advisors, who was a converted Jew, said, I got an idea. Why don't you contact Ferdinand and Isabella and offer to marry their daughter, the one that had been married to the prince? And then with her as your wife, you got a stronger claim to the throne. So they send a letter to Madrid asking for the hand in marriage of young Isabel. She's named after her mother. The answer comes back, okay, if you expel the Jews. Oh boy. So he invites the Jewish leaders to a square in Lisbon. The records say that there were 20,000 Jews there. I've been in that square and there's no way it could fit 20,000, but that's what the record says. And while they're there, priests walk among them and sprinkle them with holy water. And then the head priest stands up and said, you're all Catholics now. So they send a message back to Spain. There are no Jews in Portugal. And 5 days later, they sign the marriage contract. So King Manuel knows that these Jews are not good Catholics yet. He says, okay, we'll give you 20 years to become a good Catholic. You can have some Jewish services at home, but you're not allowed to have any public services. All right. 1497, some Jews are having a Passover Seder that's kind of public. They're arrested, but they're giving a light punishment, not too heavy. A group of Catholics have a protest meeting in a church. They say these guys should have had a heavier penalty. While they're having the meeting, somebody looks up and says, look, that icon, the eyes are shining. That shows that God is on our side. Well, somebody else who's in the room, who's, by the way, a converted Jew, says, no, you just happen to put the icon right where that light is coming through the window. That's why the lights are shining. Well, they turn on him and kill him right away. They storm outside, go to the Jewish quarter and kill about 2,000 Jews. So the Jews go underground again. Big riots. By the way, the church where that happened, I was there with my grandchildren, and my grandchildren saw it before I did. In front of the church today, there is a monument with a little Mogen David commemorating that event. Anyway, the Jews go underground again. Well, some years later, excuse me, somebody shows up claiming he's the official ambassador of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and he wants to announce that the Messiah has arrived to save the Jews. He then introduces somebody he called Shlomo Malka. Well, Shlomo Malka in Hebrew means King Solomon. He claims he's the Messiah. The Jews come out in the open and celebrate, we're saved now. Well, I don't have to tell you how the the government retaliated, a mass massacre of Jews. And then Portugal sets up its own Inquisition in 1536. Okay, by the way, here's a little island of Sao Tome off the coast of Africa. When they first arrested the Jews in Portugal, they took many of their children away from them and shipped them to this island. In 1992, their descendants on this island had a commemoration of how their ancestors were shipped down here. Okay, let's move forward to Columbus. We know that Columbus had at least 6 Jews on his ship, and here are their names. His interpreter, Luis de Torres, was Jewish. Why did he pick him as an interpreter? Well, de Torres could speak Hebrew and Chaldee, and Columbus was sailing to the Far East, and they knew that Hebrew came from the East. Therefore, Hebrew must be related to the languages of India and China. They weren't that bright. So they took this guy thinking that he could be their translator. Let's skip forward to Cortez. 1519, Cortez invades Mexico. He marches up, goes to attack the Aztecs, what is now Mexico City. In those days, it was called Tenochtitlan. It was on an island in the middle of a lake. The Aztecs had built some causeways, but Cortez knew that they would break the causeway so that his army could not cross over to get into town. Cortez had a carpenter by the name of Hernando Alonso. He built a portable bridge that Cortez could use to cross over, so he used that bridge and he conquered the Aztecs. Well, he rewarded Hernando Alonso with a huge piece of land south of Mexico City near Cuernavaca. And in 1528, he arrested Hernando Alonso. At the same time, he arrested a shopkeeper. The shopkeeper was living with a mistress, so they assumed he must be Jewish also. Now, with Alonso, he circumcised his son, and he did a few other things. So these 2 men were accused of being Jews, and they are the first people tried by the Inquisition for Judaizing in the New World. They were both executed in 1528. And that's the beginning of the execution of secret Jews in the New World. There was a number of other trials. I want to look into just 2 of them. The first one involves a group of women. Blanca Mendez de Rivera had 5 daughters, and collectively they were known as Las Blancas. They were very poor. They earned a living by doing domestic work for people, but also doing some secret Jewish practices for secret Jews in Mexico. They were put in a prison in different cells. In one of the cells, there was somebody who they thought was another prisoner, but actually was a spy who was taking notes about what they were talking about. So in the prison, the notes of the prison trial, we have their conversations. Well, let's just save time and skip down to the last line. Blanca tells her daughters, if they torture me and I talk, they will have to arrest half of Mexico. That shows there were lots of secret Jews in Mexico at that time. Now here, this is the second trial I want to go into. It's a trial of Don Luis de Carvajal. This, what I have here is from the advertisement for an opera about Carvajal. The San Francisco Opera Company had an opera composed about the Carvajals, and I drove down to San Diego and attended the world premiere of the opera. By the way, I put one of the lines in red. They describe him as an advocate of Indian rights. That isn't quite right. He actually massacred an Indian village, but that was in retaliation for the Indians attacking a Spanish village. But his story, he was from Portugal, but from 1580 to 1640, Spain ruled Portugal. So he was from Portugal, but he was in the Spanish army. He conquered the northern part of what is now Mexico. He established a little area called El Santo, the Nuevo Leon, el Nuevo Reino de Leon, the new kingdom of Leon, which is today the state of Nuevo Leon, the capital's Monterrey. And when he set up his colony, he asked the king for permission to pick his own colonists to live there. So he and his wife had no children, but they had a large number of nieces and nephews. So he got most of his family to move to Spain with them. His wife, though, said, "I won't go with you unless you let us practice Judaism in this new world." He says, "I can't do it. It's not safe." So the wife never went with him to Mexico, but she told her eldest niece, "We are secret Jews. Try to practice Judaism." She told all of her brothers and sisters and cousins on the ship over. When they arrived in Mexico, one of the, now, as I said, Luis de Carvajal did not have any children, but he sort of adopted his oldest nephew. And the oldest nephew had the same name. So we call him Luis de Carvajal, the elder, and the other one, the younger. Luis the younger is interested in returning to Judaism. He needs a copy of the Bible. In those days, the private people didn't have Bibles in their home. Only the priest did. So by the way, he kept a diary, and much of the information we have is from his diary that was confiscated by the Inquisition. He bought a Bible on the black market from a crooked priest. He knew that the Old Testament was Jewish. So he sort of reconstructed Judaism, made some big mistakes, like he prayed to St. Moses and St. Abraham. Well, by the way, we find a lot of this among crypto Jews. In 1590, and he got a lot of his relatives to, his cousins and brothers and sisters to practice this new form of Judaism. They are discovered in 1590, arrested, found guilty. And by the way, Luis de Carvajal, the elder, died in prison. The younger lived on. I mentioned the name Leonor. We're going to come back to her in a minute. That's his sister. They are sentenced by the Inquisition not to be burned at the stake, but to work for the church for the rest of their life. So Luis the Younger is working for a priest who runs a school for Indian children. The purpose of the school is to convert them to Catholicism. But Luis is in charge of the library at the school. Well, there's all kinds of interesting things in the library. For instance, there's one book that tells how do you identify a secret Jew? You identify a secret Jew if they're doing these following things. You know what the things are: not eating pork, counting stars on Saturday night, etc. And by the way, some of the things in there were mistakes. But anyway, he takes these and he says, "Oh, these are things we should be doing." And he tells his cousins, and they start practicing Judaism in secret. Then in 1596, they are discovered again, put on trial, found guilty, and burned at the stake. One brother manages to get some secret papers, some fake documents with the name Lombroso, and he manages to get out of the country with this false name. The reason I bring it up, my family's were Jews from the Greek islands. I was talking to a Jew from one of the Greek areas who managed to escape the Holocaust. He said that in his town, there was a family named Lombroso, and they all died in the Holocaust. So he might have been descendants of this guy. Okay, the story of the Carvajals is in the book called The Martyr. There are many excerpts from the diary that Luis Jr. Kept. It's a good book. You should look into it. The first time they were arrested, they had to wear the San Bonito permanently. So, and anybody wearing the San Bonito, they knew that he was a crook who had been convicted and now was working as part of his punishment. And that's what a San Bonito looked like. Here's a painting showing the auto da fe of Maria Nunez de Carvajal, one of the cousins. And here is the painting of the martyrdom of Luis de Carvajal El Mozo, the younger, that meant. Now, I mentioned Leonor de Carvajal. Going through the archives in Madrid, I found a book that contained poetry that she wrote. So I picked two of the short ones. Yo dice con gran dolor, I say with great pain que en medio de mis días, in the middle of my days, volví a los puertos sombrais, I return to these shadowy doors, de este carcel por mi error, the shadowy doors of this cell because of my errors. And y por las malditas mías, and because of the bad deeds that I performed. En todos vuestros moradas, and all of your homes, fuego no encendías, don't light a flame in el sábado que holgáis, on the Sabbath when you pray, porque serán condenadas, because you'll be condemned, las almas si tal obrais, because your soul will be condemned for these works. And these were all part of the trial against them, the evidence against them. Okay, they were arrested in the 1590s. Well, two interesting things happened in the 1590s, very important for history. First, in the year 1590, Castaño de Sosa, who was the mayor of Monterrey, and remember, Monterrey was founded by the family that I just described to you. He suddenly took a party of people up north to what is now New Mexico. He did not get permission from the Spanish viceroy to go up there. He did not take a priest with him. Interestingly, he ordered his men not to rape the Indian women. That shows something. They go up to what is New Mexico, and they settle there. This is the first Spanish settlement in what is now the United States. And it's many years before Jamestown, when the English had their settlement. Well, the settlement didn't last long. The viceroy found out about them, sent up the army, arrested them, brought them back down to Mexico City, or what is now Mexico City. And Castaño died in prison. Then 1598, Oñate went up, same way, up to New Mexico, again set up a settlement. And this is the first official settlement of the Spanish. By the way, Oñate was extremely cruel to the Indians. He used to cut off the feet of any Indian who didn't meet his goal in labor. So there's a statue of him in New Mexico. Recently, it was noticed that the Indians attacked it and cut off the foot of the statue. Very cruel. Anyway, why do I bring it up? Because of this man, Stanley Hordes, a good friend of mine. He used to be the historian for the state of New Mexico. He is a professional archivist. He reads these old Spanish documents. By profession, if you wanted to buy a piece of land in New Mexico, you had to look into the old Spanish documents to see where the borders of the lands were, and that's what he did. But once, when he was down in Mexico City in his spare time, he went into the old archives and he looked up the records of those two expeditions that I mentioned. He got the names of the men that went on the first expedition. Then he looked in the archives of the Inquisition, and he noticed that most of the men were charged with being secret Jews. Then he looked into the people that went on the second expedition, and most of them were the same people that went on the first expedition. So he showed that Jews, secret Jews, were part of the first Spanish settlement in what is now the United States. And he formed the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, which I joined later on, and I've been working with them since 1994. So he began in his spare time interviewing and looking for and interviewing secret Jews in New Mexico. And just a few of the things he discovered. One of the women, and this was actually in San Antonio, Texas, their family would always clean the house and dress up on Friday. These were Catholics. They lit candles on the Sabbath. They didn't eat pork or shellfish. They didn't mix milk and meat. 1 week before Easter, now remember, they didn't have the Hebrew calendar. 1 week before Easter, they'd have a big meal where they ate a big flat cracker. Well, you know what that was. Slaughtering animals. He got this interview with somebody. Later on, I was interviewing somebody in Brazil, and their words were almost word for word the same. They would first take a knife, had to be sharp, and they would check the knife. It couldn't have any nicks in it. They would slit the throat of the animal, remove the sciatic nerve from the leg, wash it in salt. Blood and water had to be taken outside and buried. Jewish rituals. These were done by people who thought they were Catholics. Funerals, buried in the shroud, buried within a day or two after the death, covering the mirrors and the radio and TV. It's known that Moses always covered his radio and TV during a funeral. Children are not allowed to go to the funeral. Now, this one interests me. Huevos aminados. Today, my family, at a funeral, we make these huevos. By the way, I spelt huevos in the Sephardic way with a G, not with an H, as in modern Spanish. Take some eggs, put them in water. Do not put the water on a very low flame. Do not let it boil. Leave it there for at least 4 hours with onion skins and perhaps garlic powder. Leave it for 4 hours, not boiling. At the end, you have these delicious, they're like hard-boiled eggs. The funeral, the coffin has to be from a simple wooden box, no fancy coffin. Wearing a black ribbon with a rip in it. Also on the grave, you couldn't put a Mogen David. Excuse me. Couldn't put a Mogen David because that would show that you're Jewish, but you put a flower that has 6 petals instead of a Mogen David. Weddings. The bride and groom fast on the day of the wedding. The bride and groom's hands are bound together with a white cloth. They eat a light meal, a glass of wine, etc., etc. The bride and groom then eat and drink out of the same plate and glass. And marrying los nuestros, marrying our own people. They married within their own group. Birth. This first one I never saw in our group, in our society. I don't know where it came from. Put a rooster's head over the door of the room where the birth is to occur. After the birth, the mother must not uncover herself or change clothes for 30 days. Well, I'm glad they don't do that anymore. They throw a silver coin in the baby's first bathwater. We did that. Say a prayer 8 days after birth, at which the baby's name is included, and then circumcise the boys. Now, when the baby's born, he's given a pin to wear to ward off the evil eye, the ojumalu, we call it, the ain hara in Hebrew. Babies are also given an amulet that looked like a hand, and that was pinned to the body. Also, this was put on the baby's chest to ward off the evil eye. And we do that in my family, we did this. Some of the other, during the week of Lent, don't eat any bread. We ate matzahs, one of them said. They even called it matzahs. But look at this next line. I got this from a professor in Texas who was from New Mexico. During this week before Lent, which would be Passover, which would be Hanukkah, they ate what he called banuelos. Now, we eat burmuelos at Hanukkah. I asked him, to describe his banuelos, and they were exactly the same as our burmuelos. The Ashkenazis eat latkes at that time, but they had kept our old ritual, just slightly changed the name. Uh, Sweeping the floor, you don't sweep the dust out the front door. Why? Because that would go by the mezuzah on the door, and that would be an insult to the mezuzah. So you sweep the dust to the middle of the room, scoop it up, put it in a bag, and then carry it out. Piece of bread falls on the floor, you kiss it. One of my aunts used to do that. Everybody had biblical names. Uh, I found this among many crypto Jews. They worshiped Jewish saints because they picked this up from the Catholic Church. Saint Esther, Saint Esrica, Saint Moses. Uh, okay, lighting 8 candles for Christmas. I'm going to show you a little more about this in a little while. Secret prayer groups. Secretly saying Hashem, and this is a Hebrew word, they did save a few Hebrew words. Hashem is my God. Saturday is the glorious day. They avoided going to church when they could. They had to go sometimes. And at home, they had no Catholic icons. Now, I'm interested in how much of the old language was preserved. These first 4 words are words that we use in Ladino. This does not necessarily mean they were Jewish. It could be that the people in this isolated village just kind of preserved the old pronunciation of Spanish. But I noticed, and this was from a little town way up in the mountains of New Mexico. They said mucho instead of mucho. That's as we pronounced it, much. Ansi instead of asi. Huerco, the devil was the huerco. Haftuna was spanking. But look at this last one. In Spanish, the word for God is Dios. It comes from the Latin word Deus, but it ends in an S. In Spanish, a word ending in an S is plural, but God can't be plural. So we always referred to God as El Dios, the God. I mentioned this when I was speaking. I was speaking at the College of Santa Fe. And when I mentioned this, a guy at the back of the audience jumped up and said, "That's how my grandmother used to pronounce it." Okay, here I got this Rowena Rivera. I never met her, but I was reading a paper she wrote. She was studying the songs of crypto Jews. One song, the crypto Jews called La Sagala, or the siren, La Serena. In the land, there's a tower. In the tower, there's a window. In the window, there's a maiden who calls down to the farmers. My father used to sing a song. In the sea, there's a tower. In the tower, there's a window. In the window, there's a maiden who calls down to the sailors. That song comes from the old Greek myth about the sirens. But these crypto Jews in New Mexico were singing a very similar song. Okay. This is a photo I took in front of my house. When do we light candles? Hanukkah. In New Mexico, it is a common practice among everybody, Jews, Christians, everybody, to light these luminarias, they're also called farolitos, and put them in front of your house. You take a paper bag, fill it half with sand, put a candle in the middle, and you put them around your front lawn. A crypto Jew that I knew, he was a very good friend of mine. He said his father every year did this, but he always put out only 9 candles, always 9, exactly 9, because that's what you light up for Hanukkah. So today I follow his example, and I put out, the first night I'll light this one and the first 2, and then 3 the next day. This is the photo I took this year after the 8th day of Hanukkah, which I copied from the New Mexico Secret Jews. Okay, one of the secret Jews is telling me a story. His grandfather began telling him about Moses in Egypt and the Exodus. And he said, "Why are you telling me about this?" And the grandfather says, "Porque eres judío, you are a Jew." "No, I'm Catholic." "No, eres judío, you're Jewish." I was angry with him because we had been taught to hate the Jews. The Jews had made the cross and killed Christ. the grandfather poured water over me and said, "No estás bautizado. You are no longer baptized." And the kid became a crypto Jew. Now let's go to Portugal. And this fellow, who became known as the Portuguese Dreyfus, his name is Arthur Carlos Barros Bastos. In 1920, there was a coup in Portugal. A new government took over, overthrew the old dictatorship, and announced that Portugal would now become a democracy and would have freedom of religion. This fellow stood up. He's also, by the way, the founder of the Portuguese Boy Scouts. He stood up and announced that his family had been secret Jews. He's coming out into the open, and the new government is going to welcome secret Jews to come out into the open. He invited others to do so. He built a synagogue in Porto. I'll show you some pictures pretty soon. He got a very wealthy Jew, originally from India, but who became wealthy in Hong Kong, named Kaduri. He put up the money for the synagogue. He published a newsletter that he called Halapid. I'll tell you more about this later. And a few years later, there was another coup. A dictatorship took over. He was arrested and charged with all kinds of things. And anyway, a number of years later, he lived into the 1960s when he died. But here is the synagogue he built in Porto. It is a beautiful synagogue, very large. Part of the inside. Here is his daughter. I spoke to her about her father. She says one of the things he was charged with was homosexuality, but he wasn't homosexual. He was circumcising the Jewish men, and the government didn't understand what that was. So that was one of the charges against him. Then she gave me copies of his newsletter that he put out. He called it Halapid, which means the list, or something like that in Hebrew. This is one from 1942. Los Siete Filhos, the seven brothers of Hannah is this article. Here's another one from the 1950s. A woman of Jewish tradition he's writing about. Well, at the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, we have today a newsletter called Halapid, and here's a copy of one of ours. I was the editor of it for a while. We copied this from what he did. There is now a village in northern Portugal called Belmonte. I have visited the village 3 times now. In 1919, a Portuguese Jewish mining engineer got a contract to work there for 3 years. So he goes to this town of Belmonte every week, and in every little town all over Spain and Portugal in those days, once a week there'd be an open market in the town square. So on the day of the open market, he goes there to buy some of his provisions. He goes up to one of the stalls. He asked for something he wanted. They didn't have it. He said, "Okay, I'll try that stall over there." The guy at the stall says, "No, don't go there. That guy's Jewish. He'll cheat you." So he goes there and buys what he wants, and then asks the guy, "Are you Jewish?" The fellow says, no, we're not Jewish." He was very adamant. "We're not Jewish, absolutely." Well, Schwartz, as I said, was there for 3 years. So every week he went back to that same dealer. About a year later, he and the dealer are very good friends. And once again, Schwartz says, "Tell me, are you Jewish?" And the guy, in sort of a whisper, says, "Yes, we're Jewish." And Schwartz says, "Well, I'm Jewish too." And the guy says, "That's impossible. We're the only Jews in the world." He had discovered this little community of secret Jews in this little town. And anyway, as I said with Barros Bastos, for a few years they had a democracy with freedom of religion. And Schwartz tried to get these Jews to come out in the open, and they discussed it, but then the coup took over, and this group went underground again and stayed underground until 1987. A rabbi from Portland, Oregon, Joshua Stamfer, went there to find them. He didn't quite know how to contact them when he got there, but he was walking down the street wearing a yarmulke, and one day, and somebody stopped him and said, "Are you Jewish?" And he had refound them. And he explained to them, Portugal is now a democracy. It has freedom of religion. Why don't you come out? So they began coming out into the open in 1987. 1988, they had their first Jewish wedding. And here is a photo of them having their Santa Festa, their holy festival, which was Passover. And among the things they did when they were secret Jews, they had to go to church. So as they walked into the church, under their breath, they would say, "We come not to worship statues or idols. We come only to worship you, our God." If a baby was born, they would baptize the baby in the church, then go home, generally down in their basements, and have a secret baptism, a Jewish baptism for the children. If there was a wedding, they would have the Jewish wedding 1 or 2 days before the Catholic wedding and make sure that the bride and groom had slept together before they have the Catholic wedding. They had their Passover, the Santa Festa, the Holy Feast, but of course, they got some of the story a little bit off. Their story was the Jews were expelled from Egypt by the Inquisition, and they were rescued by Saint Esther. So they got Purim and Passover a little bit mixed up. Here's Stanley Hordas, the guy I showed you before, meeting Mr. Nunez in Belmonte. I was there with him at the time. This is their Sabbath candles, but they're Jews. So how do they hide their candles? Look closely at, you see the little bottom part, like a cup. They would put olive oil in there with a wick and then have a flame. And then you notice the handle is kind of tall, and at the top of the handle, there's a little hook. They would put this, they had a big earthenware jar, about 2 feet, maybe 3 feet deep. They would put this in the jar, hooked over the rim of the jar so that it wouldn't fall in. So the flame could burn, but the flame could not be seen by people walking by their windows. Here is a guy that was with us on that trip, Dennis Duran, from New Mexico. He was raised a Catholic. His whole family discovered they were Jewish. They left Judaism. He returned, they left Catholicism, I should say. He returned to Judaism. But when Jews in New Mexico returned to Judaism and join a synagogue, all the synagogues are Ashkenazi, whose the basic religion's the same, of course, but all the little side things are a little different. And he wanted a synagogue just for secret Jews who had come out. So he was going to form a synagogue made up only of returned Jews. Unfortunately, he died young, and he was never able to carry out what he wanted to do. Now, these Jews in Belmonte, the first time I visited them, their synagogue was 2 adjoining rooms in a apartment building that they rented. Some people in America raised money to hire a rabbi from Madrid to show them how to return to Judaism. The first thing he did was show them how to separate the men and the women are in the back in these 2 rooms. The women were in one, the men in another, and they cut a big hole in the wall so the women could look through and watch. The women were very angry about this, and many of them wanted to return to their old way of synagogue. Anyway, my second trip there, they had built this new synagogue, beautiful synagogue. A lot of the money for it came from donations from Americans. There's my granddaughter and her mom at the door, and that's me inside there. Now, they took me out to their cemetery. It's a little hard to see in this photo, but you notice the Mogen David, it's not part of the original grave. when this person died, it was before the Jews came out. So they had carved in the thing a little flower with the 6 petals. Once they returned to Judaism and it was legal to identify a grave as Jewish, they made a stone Mogen David and then put it on the old tomb. And you found these all over that graveyard. Here's their mikvah. Here in the town of Guarda, this is a key shop, but it was the old synagogue of the Jews. Now look at that symbol there. It's a cross over a circle. If a building was converted from Judaism to Catholicism, this is the sign that that building was now pure. And you walk through the old Jewish quarter of this town and you see these signs all over. Oh, also up at the door, very often you see a little notch where the mezuzah used to be. There's another one. Here's the town of Tomar in Portugal. This fellow, Mr. Vasco, he discovered that he was Jewish. So he got possession of the old synagogue and began refurbishing it into a synagogue again. And many of the people of the town came back to Judaism. He says almost all the people on this block where the synagogue is donated money to help him rebuild the synagogue. Most of them are still Catholic, but they're pretty sure that they used to be Jewish. Here's the inside of the synagogue. You notice the bima is in the middle, which is the old style. You go to a Tiberias in Israel, look at the old synagogues there. The bima's in the middle. The congregation sat around them with the rabbi in the middle. Here he is. This photo's a little out of focus, but he's showing me the well where they got the water for the mikvah. And if you look closely, you can see that there are grooves where they were pulling up the rope for 100 years or so, and it left grooves in the stone. Okay, let's look at a little bit about Portuguese explorations. Henry the Navigator, he was a prince. He was in line to be king, but he was about 4th down the line, so there was little chance that he'd become king. But he sponsored navigation, and he started before the Spanish did. And he got, they developed the astrolabe and various different ways of navigation. By the way, there's an error here. Instead of, this should say 1488. I misprinted this. I'm just noticing it now. Bartholomew Diaz was, the Portuguese were going to get to India by sailing around Africa, but they didn't know how big Africa was. So they were exploring the coast of Africa. Every few years, it'd send somebody a little further down. 1488, Bartholomew Diaz discovers the southern tip of Africa. And now he knows they can sail around Africa to get to India. He sails home. 1497, Vasco da Gama sails around Africa, lands in India. And in India, he finds a Jew. So he arrests him. But this Jew can speak a language that's pretty close to Portuguese. So he figures this guy will be handy. He can translate for me. So he converts him to Catholicism. We do not know the original name of this Jew, but we do know the name that Vasco da Gama gave him. Da Gama named him after himself. He's known as Gaspar da Gama. In the year 1500, the Spanish are sending another ship intending to go around the tip of Africa to India, led by Alvarez Cabral. By the way, Alvarez Cabral was from that town of Belmonte that I just showed you. And he has aboard with him Gaspar da Gama. Well, they're sailing down the coast of Africa. They're hit by a huge storm. The storm blows them way out to sea. They find a little piece of land. Now look around here, Recife, Natal, Fortaleza. You see this part of Brazil that sticks way out into the ocean? Now, South America had not been explored by the Spanish yet. Just a few ships had made little touches there, but they didn't know much. The Portuguese come here, they see some land, they assume it is an island because it's way, way out in the Atlantic. So Portugal claims this little piece of land, and then they sail back. Today, interestingly, if that storm had blown them off in another direction or had sunk the ship, the Portuguese never would have landed here, and these 200 million people of Brazil would not be speaking Portuguese today. They'd be speaking Spanish. But that little wind changed the history. Now, what's so important about this? Okay, Portugal has claimed this little piece of land. At first, they think it's an island. Later, they discover it's part of this big continent. As I said before, from 1580 to 1640, Portugal was ruled by Spain. So Portugal is ruled by Spain, but Portugal is ruling Brazil. So the Portuguese rule of Brazil is a little bit loose. So in 1630, the Dutch take advantage of this and they grab that little piece of Brazil around Natal and that area in Recife. And they rule it only until 1654, only for 24 years. But interestingly, 2 synagogues opened up almost immediately. Does that show that there were Jews there already, secret Jews? By the way, the Dutch had religious liberty. They had already become Protestants. Some say that these Jews came there with the Dutch. We don't know, but there were Jews there, 2 synagogues. Well, 1654, the Portuguese finally are free from Spain. They come back and they take back control of those areas. Now it's illegal to be a Jew. What's going to happen to those Jews that were there? One group, the largest group, went underground, and I'll come back to them later. But another group, interestingly, moved up north to another Dutch colony called New Amsterdam. They set up a synagogue. The synagogue was called Sheriff Israel. The synagogue, that congregation, still exists. It is the oldest Jewish congregation in the Americas. New Amsterdam was a Dutch colony. Well, it wasn't a Dutch colony for very long. Pretty soon the British took over and they changed the name of the colony to New York. And I've been told that that colony still exists. Okay, now let's go back to those Jews who remained in Brazil. Here's Elio Daniel Cordeiro. He is the founder of a group called Shema. No, the word that matches one of the words in a famous prayer, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. But the words in Portuguese stand for Sociedade Hebraica de Estudios Marranos, the Hebrew Society for Marrano Studies. This guy was a secret Jew. He returned to Judaism. He started this society. They used to have a website that I used to visit, but the last time I checked, it wasn't up anymore. And they were interested in bringing Jews back to Judaism. And they had over 2,000 members. Here's Rabbi Henry Sobel. He was actually born in the United States, but when he was very young, they moved to Brazil. He has been active in bringing secret Jews back to Judaism. But some of the Orthodox Jews don't like what he's doing. He mentioned that once he went to a conference in Chile of rabbis, and he got up to speak, and a bunch of the Orthodox Jews walked out. But he is still active down there. Let's go back to this picture that I showed you earlier, the program. The guy on the right, João Madeiros. João Madeiros, born a Catholic. The Catholic priest in town ordered the local dairy not to deliver milk to his home because they weren't good Catholics. Well, he got so mad, he quit the Catholic Church and he studied to be a Presbyterian minister. For graduation, he had to write a thesis. They gave him the topic. The Jews were the chosen people, but they no longer are. That title now belongs to the Presbyterians. He wrote the opposite, that the Jews still were the chosen people. So the Presbyterians, they let him become a minister, but they didn't give him a pulpit. They gave him a desk job. So he got angry. He quit the Presbyterian church and he set up a Jewish congregation. He got ownership of one of those synagogues that opened up under the Dutch period. He had 108 families that belonged. We were interviewing him in a hotel in Natal. Downstairs in the lobby, there was a Moroccan Jew who hated this guy. So we went down. I was one of those and went down to speak to him. What's wrong? Well, this Maderos was never ordained a rabbi. He just declared himself to be a rabbi. Also, he writes his own Torahs and mezuzahs. So we went up to the meeting room where he was, and I asked him about this. He says, oh, yeah, but didn't Moses declare himself to be a rabbi? Didn't he write his own Torahs? Okay. Anyway, he brought back 108 families to Judaism. Now, I'll end our program with this interesting little thing. Notice that red line I drew. It goes from Natal to a little town called Kaiko. We hired a bus. There were about 20 of us. We were visiting Jews, crypto Jews all over Brazil, but we drove for 4 hours to get here. Now, just think, remember I told you about the group that went up to New York, New Amsterdam? Another group went inland. It took us 4 hours on a paved road to get here. Now, how long would it take you on an unpaved road on a vehicle drawn by a donkey? It's going to take you weeks or so. So this was a very isolated town. The town is called Kaiko. The town, unfortunately, the photos I took there disappeared, so I got these photos off the internet. As you arrive in town, you see what looks like a European castle. When you get close, you notice it's only about half the size or even smaller than a castle. At the entrance, as you cross the moat to get into the castle, there's a Mogan David over the entrance. You get inside, there's a big hall, there's a menorah, but the menorah is as tall as you are. It's at least 5.5 feet tall, 6 feet tall. On the wall is a picture of Golda Meir. Right next to the picture is a copy of a letter that she wrote to this man, Monsignor Manuel Traves de Araujo. He is the Catholic priest in this town. His family were among those Jews who left when the Dutch were kicked out of Brazil. His community are Catholic. They consider themselves Catholic, but they don't eat pork. What they did, by the way, when they heard we were coming, they were going to meet some real Jews whom they hardly ever saw. So they called a town meeting. About 70 of them showed up to talk to us. And they were telling us their story. They don't eat pork. They don't mix milk and meat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the women said, and we also don't cook meat in its own blood. One of the women there said, oh, I cook meat in its own blood. And the other women all jumped up. No, you're not supposed to do that. Anyway, they follow the Jewish dietary laws and a few other Jewish laws, but they still practice Catholicism. And as our meeting was over, they asked, are we going to be able to stay in touch? So when I was the editor of Halapid, every time we published an issue, I sent a copy down to Araujo. Okay, that completes our presentation. Do we have any questions? Hello?
Does anyone want to ask Art a question? This is your opportunity. Okay. So Art, I would like to thank you very much for your presentation. This is very informative. I will be sharing this copy in our Sephardic family and posting that on YouTube as well.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Have a great day.
Bye.